Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Night steps. Have you ever felt the chill of being watched, even when you're sure you're alone? That sensation stayed with me throughout that fateful camping trip in the Colorado wilderness. My name is Mark, and this is the story of how my friends and I discovered that some things are better left unexplained. It was early September when we decided to escape the city for the weekend. I was excited to spend time with my friends, Jake, Sarah, Emma, and Alex, away from work and the bustle of daily life. We found a secluded spot in the mountains, a place where few dared to venture, deep within Pine Valley. The journey took us several hours, winding through narrow dirt roads surrounded by tall pine trees and rugged terrain. When we arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing where we set up our tents. The air was crisp, and the smell of pine filled our lungs. As we unpacked our gear, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was what we needed: nature, camaraderie, and a break from technology. By nightfall, we gathered around a crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to the scariest experiences we ever had. I made a joke about camping being haunted, but we all laughed it off. It was just a fun story, right? As the fire began to die down and the shadows grew deeper, a silence enveloped us. That's when I first heard it, a faint sound, like footsteps crunching on the forest floor. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me. I glanced around at my friends, but no one else seemed to have noticed. "Did you hear that?" I finally asked, my voice low. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. "Hear what?" "There's something out there," I insisted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The others shrugged it off, laughing nervously and insisting it was probably just a deer. I wanted to believe them, but the sound continued, echoing softly in the distance, always just beyond the light of the fire. Jake stood up, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll check it out," he said, trying to sound brave. He stepped away from the warmth of the fire, the beam of light cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Wait," I called after him. "Don't go too far." He waved me off, his laughter fading into the shadows. We sat in silence, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the trees. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as we waited for Jake to return. Moments stretched into what felt like hours. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement. The footsteps had stopped, but now there was a different sound, a rustling, like something was moving through the underbrush. "Jake?" I called out, my heart pounding. No answer. Suddenly, the flashlight beam flickered back toward us, revealing Jake's pale face. He looked shaken. "There's nothing there," he said, but his voice was shaky. I swear I heard something moving in the trees. We exchanged worried glances, the laughter from earlier now a distant memory. The night had taken on a different quality, the air heavy with something unnameable. The sound of footsteps returned, this time louder, circling our camp like a predator stalking its prey. "What is happening?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't answer her. The sound continued, relentless, echoing through the darkness, filling us with dread. And then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. We all held our breath, straining to hear anything beyond the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment, it felt as if the entire forest had paused, holding its breath along with us. I glanced around at my friends, their faces pale and wide-eyed, reflecting the flickering firelight. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should go," I said, my voice shaky. "Let's pack up and get out of here." But as I suggested it, a wave of dread washed over me. The footsteps had stopped, but the unease in my stomach only grew stronger. It was like we were surrounded by an invisible presence, something that had been watching us from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Maybe it's just an animal," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Deer or something." But I could tell she didn't believe her own words. The way the footsteps had circled our camp made it feel too deliberate, too calculated. "We can't just sit here," Emma urged, her eyes darting nervously to the tree line. "Let's pack our things." We all sprang into action, moving quickly, hands shaking as we tried to gather our gear. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I kept glancing back toward the dark woods, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows. The footsteps had returned, echoing in the darkness once more, now closer than ever. As I fumbled to zip up my bag, I could hear Alex breathing heavily beside me, his fear palpable. "What if it's someone trying to scare us?" he suggested, trying to sound brave. But even he didn't sound convinced. "Or something worse," I muttered under my breath, but I wasn't sure I wanted to voice that thought out loud. Suddenly, the sound of a branch snapping echoed through the stillness, and we all froze. It was loud, too loud for an animal. It sounded deliberate, as if something was intentionally stepping on the twigs to announce its presence. "Go! Go!" I shouted, grabbing my pack and bolting toward the path leading back to the car. The others followed, hearts pounding in sync with our hurried steps. We raced down the narrow trail, the darkness enveloping us as the trees loomed overhead, blocking out the moonlight. But as we ran, the footsteps returned, keeping pace with us. It felt as if whatever was out there was toying with us, always just behind. "Keep moving," I yelled, glancing back, but I saw nothing. The shadows danced among the trees, but they remained empty. The adrenaline surged through my veins as we reached the clearing where we had parked the car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, desperate to get inside and lock the doors. The footsteps faded as we reached the vehicle, but the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and suffocating. "What just happened?" Emma panted, leaning against the car, her face pale. "Was it a person? Or something else?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice strained. "But we need to get out of here." I finally unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The others piled in, panic evident in their eyes. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. But just as I was about to pull away, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving among the trees, just at the edge of the clearing. My heart dropped. "Did you see that?" I gasped, pointing. "What?" Jake asked, peering out the window. Before I could respond, the shadow moved closer, revealing the outline of a figure standing just beyond the light. It was too dark to see details, but I could feel its gaze boring into us. A shiver ran down my spine as I pressed the gas pedal, desperate to escape whatever horror was lurking just beyond our sight. "Drive!" Alex shouted, his voice breaking with fear. I threw the car into gear and sped away down the narrow road, the headlights slicing through the darkness as we left the campsite behind. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that the footsteps were still out there, following us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Part 3: Final Moments and Uncertainty. It was a long, tense drive back to civilization. The tension in the car was palpable, a thick fog of fear that wrapped around us. We didn't speak much, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure from the woods following us, but there was nothing, just the empty road behind us. "Do you think it was just a prank?" Emma finally asked, breaking the silence. "Maybe someone was out there, messing with us?" "I don't know," I replied, still shaken. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt intentional. The weight of what we had experienced hung heavily in the air. We had gone from a fun camping trip to a night filled with terror in what felt like an instant. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, even now that we were driving away from that cursed spot. As we reached the edge of the forest, the shadows began to thin out, replaced by the glow of streetlights. The tension slowly began to ease, but the memory of those footsteps lingered in my mind. What had been out there? Was it human? Was it something else entirely? When we finally arrived back in town, we parked at a diner, the bright lights offering a stark contrast to the darkness we had just escaped. I could see my friends were still on edge, glancing nervously at the door every time it swung open. "I need to get some air," Jake said suddenly, standing up. I watched him walk outside, the door chiming behind him. The rest of us sat in silence, our food untouched. "Do you think we'll ever know what it was?" Alex asked, breaking the quiet. I shook my head. Some things are better left unanswered. Just then, Jake came back in, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, his voice trembling. He held his phone in his hand, the screen lit up with a photo. "What is it?" I asked, leaning in closer. He turned the phone toward us, revealing an image taken just moments before we had left the campsite. A figure stood in the darkness, partially hidden behind a tree, its eyes glowing eerily in the light of the flash. "No," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the picture. The figure was too familiar, too haunting. It was almost as if it was watching us, waiting for the moment to strike. The photo had captured something beyond our understanding, something we could never fully explain. And as I looked back at my friends, I knew that none of us would ever feel safe in the woods again. We had escaped, but the terror of that night would follow us, lingering in the shadows, haunting our thoughts for years to come. And somewhere in those woods, the footsteps still echoed, waiting for the next unsuspecting campers to stumble upon their domain. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly left that place behind. I could see the tension in Jake's eyes as he stared at the image on his phone. The figure in the photo seemed to watch us, its gaze penetrating. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a trick of the light. It felt like something alive and aware. My heart raced as I glanced back at the dark woods, even though we were miles away. "What do we do?" Alex asked, looking at Jake. "We can't just pretend this didn't happen." I nodded, feeling the weight of fear settle back in my chest. "We need to report it. Maybe someone else has seen something strange out there." We all agreed, and with that resolution, we left the diner, the chill of the night air biting at our skin. I felt the urge to glance over my shoulder as we walked to the car, convinced something was still watching us from the shadows. Once in the car, Jake called the local ranger station. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before someone picked up. I listened as he explained our experience, the footsteps, the photo, and the feeling of being followed. Do you know if anyone else has reported strange activity out there? Jake asked, his voice tense. There was a pause on the line. Not recently, but we'll send someone to check it out. You kids need to be careful in those woods. There are things out there that can't always be explained. A knot tightened in my stomach at the ranger's words. We were just kids, naive to the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. The kind of things that couldn't be captured on camera or explained by logic. After hanging up, we all sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The lights of the diner faded into the distance as we drove back toward our homes. I wanted to say something comforting, something to break the weight of the tension, but the words wouldn't come. As we crossed the outskirts of town, I glanced back at the mountains. They loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding against the starry sky. Something about them felt alive, as if they were harboring secrets that we would never uncover. I couldn't help but wonder what had been out there in those woods, what had been circling our camp, waiting for us to make a mistake. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night didn't fade. We stayed in touch, often sharing the strange dreams we had since returning. Jake dreamed of the figure lurking just beyond his tent. Emma dreamed of endless footsteps that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. I had nightmares too, waking up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced I could still hear the crunch of leaves beneath phantom footsteps. One night, I decided to take a walk around my neighborhood to clear my mind. The streetlights flickered overhead, and the quiet of the night settled around me. But as I walked, I began to hear it again, the sound of footsteps echoing in the darkness, always just behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see someone there, but the street was empty. The fear wrapped around me, reminding me of the forest, of those footsteps circling our camp, and the figure in the photo. I hurried home, slamming the door shut behind me. A few days later, Jake called. "Mark, you need to see this," he said, his voice shaking. "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. I found more photos from that night. I went through the ones I took with my phone. There's something in them. You need to come over. When I arrived, Jake had his laptop set up, and his face was pale. "Look at these," he said, pulling up the photos from our camping trip. As I looked at the images, my heart sank. In the background of one photo, just barely visible among the trees, was a figure, the same figure from the photo he had shown us at the diner. But this time, it was closer. Its eyes shone like two small stars, reflecting the flash of his camera. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you think it wants?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jake admitted, looking more frightened than I had ever seen him. "But I think it's been watching us longer than we realize. We need to go back. We need to find out what it is." "No way," I said, shaking my head. "We can't go back there. It's dangerous." But as I looked at the photos, the longing to confront whatever haunted us tugged at my mind. What if it was just a trick of the light? What if it was just our imagination? In the days that followed, I found myself consumed by the mystery of that night. My friends felt it too, but pulled to uncover the truth. It wasn't just about fear anymore, it was about understanding, about confronting the unknown. And then came the day we received the call from the ranger station. They had investigated the area and found something unsettling. A series of old camping supplies, torn tents, personal items left behind, and strange markings carved into trees. But most chilling of all was the discovery of a small, weathered sign that read, "Turn back. This place is not safe." I sat in shock as I listened to Jake relay the news. It felt like a warning, one we had ignored in our naivety. "Maybe we should just let it go," I said. "We're back in our lives now. We can't keep chasing shadows." But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. The footsteps, the figure, the fear, they had become part of us, something we couldn't escape. The mountains loomed large in our minds, and I felt an undeniable urge to return to that cursed place, to confront whatever had been watching us that night. As the sun began to set, casting a long shadow across my room, I realized I had two choices: to ignore the call of the unknown or to face it head-on. I turned to the window, gazing at the distant peaks, and made my decision. But one question lingered in my mind. What if the thing that followed us was still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting campers to stumble into its domain? Shadows on the shore. Have you ever felt the world shift beneath your feet, as if the very ground you stand on is hiding something? I still remember that feeling vividly from our trip to Cedar Lake last summer. My name is Lisa, and my husband, Mark, and I decided to escape the chaos of city life for a weekend of camping in the mountains. The trip started as a dream. Cedar Lake was known for its crystal clear waters and beautiful landscapes. We arrived just as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the trees and illuminating the shoreline. We quickly set up our tent, excited to explore the area before darkness fell. The cool mountain air felt refreshing against my skin, and the sound of the gentle lapping of the water calmed my racing heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the world transformed. Shadows stretched across the water, growing longer and darker. Mark and I sat together on a log by the shore, sharing a bag of snacks and enjoying the peacefulness of the setting. "Can you believe how beautiful this place is?" Mark said, smiling at me. His enthusiasm was infectious. "Yes, it's perfect," I replied, taking a deep breath of the fresh, pine-scented air. We began to talk about everything: our hopes, our dreams, and the future we wanted to build together. But then, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, silhouetted against the fading light. I blinked and it was gone. I shook my head, convinced I was imagining things. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart racing slightly. "See what?" Mark replied, glancing around. "I thought I saw someone over there," I said, pointing to the trees. "Probably just a deer or something." "Let's enjoy the night," he said, trying to reassure me. I forced a smile and took another bite of my snack, but the unease lingered in the back of my mind. We spent the next few hours talking and laughing, but the darkness closed in around us, and with it came an unsettling quiet. The gentle sounds of nature were replaced by an eerie stillness that sent shivers down my spine. As we prepared to head back to our tent, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye again. This time, it was clearer, a shadow darting between the trees. I turned to Mark, my heart racing. "Mark, I really think there's someone out there," I insisted. "Let's just go to bed, Lisa. You're tired." "You're probably just seeing things in the dark," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. But I couldn't shake the feeling. As we crawled into our tent, I felt the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. I tried to ignore the sound of twigs snapping in the distance, the rustling of leaves that seemed too close. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping sleep would come, but it didn't. Instead, I lay there wide awake, listening to the sounds of the night. I could hear the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, but alongside that, I started to hear something else, whispers, faint and indistinct, carried by the wind. "Mark, do you hear that?" I whispered, trying not to sound scared. "Hear what?" he replied sleepily. I hesitated, unsure how to describe the unease building inside me. "Just listen." We both lay there in silence, the night pressing in around us. And then, in the stillness, I heard it again, a soft murmur, like a voice calling from the darkness. It sent a chill racing down my spine. "Mark, I don't think we're alone out here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" he asked, now fully awake. "I keep hearing something." "It sounds like someone's out there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark sat up, looking toward the entrance of the tent. "Maybe it's just the wind playing tricks on you." "You're just imagining it," he said, though I could tell he was starting to feel uneasy too. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. There was something out there, lurking just beyond the edge of our campfire's light. The night pressed in around us, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, heightening my senses. The whispers continued, just beyond the edges of my comprehension, pulling at my mind like a siren's song. I glanced at Mark, whose face was shadowed in the dim light of the lantern, trying to read his expression. "Should we go check it out?" he suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. The idea terrified me, yet something in me urged to confront whatever was out there. "Are you serious?" I exclaimed, my voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "What if it's a wild animal or, I don't know, something worse?" Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture I knew meant he was feeling anxious. "Maybe we should just make sure everything is okay. We can't let our imaginations get the better of us." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The urge to know was strong, but so was the fear of what we might find. "Fine. But let's stick together," I said, my voice shaking slightly. As we unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the cool night air enveloped us like a thick blanket. The lake shimmered under the faint glow of the stars, but the surrounding woods loomed ominously, shrouded in darkness. I felt small and vulnerable under the vast sky, the whispers echoing in my ears. "Hello?" Mark called out, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. We waited, the silence hanging heavily between us. Then, from somewhere deep within the trees, I heard it again, a soft rustling, followed by a low chuckle that sent ice running through my veins. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, gripping Mark's arm. He nodded, his eyes wide. "Let's just take a few steps forward. We can see if anyone's really out there." We stepped cautiously toward the tree-line, the crunch of twigs underfoot echoing in the stillness. With every step, the tension coiled tighter in my chest. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. As we got closer to the edge of the woods, shadows danced between the trees, twisting and shifting in the dim light. "Maybe it's just some kids messing around," Mark suggested, trying to reassure himself as much as me. But as we peered deeper into the woods, the shadows began to take form, vague shapes that lingered just beyond our sight. They didn't seem to belong to any living creature. They moved with an unnatural grace, swaying in the darkness. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "Mark, I don't think we should be here," I whispered, pulling back. "Something isn't right." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. My heart stopped. It was a tall man, his face obscured by the shadows. He stood there, unmoving, watching us. "Hello?" Mark called again, his voice wavering. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering us. "Let's go back," I urged, panic rising in my throat. But Mark held his ground, intrigued. "Wait, maybe he can help us." "Help us with what?" "We're not lost," I replied, my voice rising. The figure shifted slightly, but still, he did not speak. With each passing moment, the tension grew thicker. I could feel the whispers now, rising and falling like a tide, mingling with the sounds of the forest. The air felt charged, crackling with an energy I couldn't understand. "Hey!" Mark shouted again, more forcefully this time. "Can you help us?" Finally, the figure stepped forward into the dim light. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets. A chill ran down my spine as I took a step back, instinctively moving closer to Mark. "Get away from here," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent shivers through me. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could react, he turned and dashed back into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. The sudden movement startled me, and I stumbled back, my breath quickening. "What just happened?" I gasped, fear flooding my senses. "I don't know," Mark replied, looking bewildered. "But we need to get back to the tent. Now." We turned and ran back to our campsite, the adrenaline propelling us forward. My heart raced, pounding in my chest as I glanced over my shoulder. The woods felt alive, the whispers intensifying, swirling around us like a storm. We reached the tent, and Mark fumbled to unzip it, his hands shaking. We hurried inside and zipped it shut. The sound of the fabric scraping together felt like a barrier between us and whatever lurked outside. "What do you think he meant?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know, but we need to stay quiet," Mark said, his voice tense. "Whatever that was, I don't think we're safe." As we huddled together in the dark, the night pressed in around us. The whispers grew louder, the shadows outside shifting restlessly. I could feel the terror pooling in my stomach as I glanced toward the tent flap, every rustle in the night setting my nerves on edge. The air felt thick with dread, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in around us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the darkness of the tent. Every soft rustle outside felt magnified, echoing in the silence that enveloped us. Mark and I huddled close together, our breaths quickening as we listened for any sign of what was out there. The whispers continued, a cacophony of indistinct murmurs swirling around us, growing louder and more insistent. "What do we do now?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "We wait," Mark replied, though I could hear the uncertainty in his tone. "If we don't draw attention to ourselves, maybe it will go away." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The figure we had seen wasn't just a random stranger in the woods, there was something more sinister lurking out there. The moon hung high in the sky, casting pale light into the tent through the thin fabric. Every shadow outside felt alive, shifting and swirling like dark smoke. I kept glancing at the entrance, half expecting to see that gaunt figure watching us again. "What if he comes back?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then we'll be ready," Mark said, though I could see doubt in his eyes. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The whispers became a haunting lullaby, lulling me into a state of uneasy awareness. Just when I thought I might drift off to sleep, a loud thud echoed outside, jolting me back to reality. "Did you hear that?" I gasped, gripping Mark's arm tightly. Yes, he replied, his voice tense. Stay quiet. We both held our breath, listening intently. The thud came again, followed by a low, rumbling growl that sent chills racing down my spine. I could feel the panic rising in my throat, clawing its way up. Suddenly, the tent flap shifted. I held my breath as I saw a shadow moving outside, dark and fluid. Who's there? Mark shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. Silence fell. My heart raced in my chest, pounding against my ribcage as the shadow paused. I could hear the soft sound of breathing on the other side of the fabric. Then, in a chilling whisper, the voice returned, low and distorted. Leave this place, before it's too late. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I recognized that voice. It was the same voice that had warned us earlier. My instincts screamed at me to get out, but my feet felt glued to the ground. What do you want? Mark called, his voice shaky. Who are you? Leave, the voice repeated, more insistent this time. You don't belong here. Before we could respond, the shadow vanished, melting back into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, as if the very woods were alive with restless spirits urging us to leave. I glanced at Mark, fear etched across his face. We can't stay here, I said urgently. We have to leave now. Let's wait until first light, he replied, his eyes darting around the tent. It'll be safer then. But I knew we couldn't wait. Something was wrong, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the shadows were not going to let us leave willingly. Mark, we can't risk it. I pleaded. We need to go now while we still can. He looked conflicted, but finally nodded, the determination returning to his eyes. Okay. We'll pack up and get out of here. As quietly as we could, we began to gather our things. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach as I unzipped the tent flap, peeking outside. The world beyond was shrouded in darkness, the lake reflecting the moonlight like a sheet of glass. We can make a run for the car, Mark whispered, glancing back at me. Taking a deep breath, we stepped out of the tent, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The whispers swirled around us like a tempest, the shadows stretching and twisting in the corners of my vision. Run! Mark shouted, and we bolted toward the path leading to the parking area, the fear propelling us forward. The sounds of the night surrounded us, the rustle of leaves and the crunch of twigs echoing as we sprinted. But just as we reached the edge of the woods, I felt a cold breeze wash over me, like a shroud of ice. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead, blocking our path. It was the same man we had seen earlier, his face twisted in an unsettling grin. You can't leave, he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. My heart raced, and in that moment, everything felt like a nightmare. I pulled Mark back, my mind racing. The man stepped closer, his presence heavy with a sense of foreboding. Please, just let us go. Mark shouted, desperation flooding his voice. The man tilted his head, his grin widening. You shouldn't have come here. You belong to the shadows now. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out everything else as I felt the shadows closing in around us. Run! I screamed, and we dashed past him, fear pushing us forward. We sprinted through the trees, branches whipping against our skin as we ran for the car. The darkness felt alive, swirling around us as if the very forest was trying to hold us back. Finally, we burst into the clearing where our car sat, a beacon of light in the oppressive darkness. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. Get in! I shouted, urgency pouring from my voice. We climbed inside, slamming the doors shut, and I threw the car into reverse, my heart pounding. As we sped away, I glanced back at the trees, half expecting to see that figure standing among the shadows, watching us leave. But the road was empty. The whispers faded into the distance as we drove, the weight of the darkness lifting slightly. Did that really happen? Mark asked, breathless and pale, turning to me. I don't know, I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. But I never want to come back here again. As we drove away from Cedar Lake, the weight of what we had experienced hung heavy in the air. The shadows that haunted those woods would stay with us, lingering in our memories long after we had escaped. And even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that the darkness is still watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to wander into its embrace. Voice in the mountains. Have you ever felt a whisper beckoning you from the shadows, urging you to stray from the path? My name is David, and I will never forget the day my friends and I went hiking in the rugged Rockies. It was supposed to be a weekend filled with laughter, adventure, and breathtaking views, but it turned into a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. The plan was simple: a group of 5 friends, Sarah, Jake, Emma, and Tom, and I would tackle a well-known trail that promised stunning vistas and serene landscapes. We arrived at the trailhead early in the morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the mountains, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. I felt the thrill of excitement bubbling within me as we strapped on our backpacks and set off. The trail was beautiful, surrounded by tall pine trees and the sound of a gentle stream nearby. We joked and laughed, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the cool mountain breeze. For a while, everything felt perfect. As we climbed higher, the trail became steeper and more challenging. The laughter faded into a rhythm of heavy breathing and the crunch of gravel underfoot. It was exhausting but invigorating. I took a moment to appreciate the view, turning to admire the valley stretching far below us, a patchwork of greens and browns. But then, as we continued along the trail, I began to hear it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper drifting through the trees. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as we walked, the sound became clearer, almost calling to us. Did you hear that? I asked, turning to my friends. Hear what? Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in confusion. Something. I don't know. It sounds like someone is whispering, I said, glancing around, trying to catch the source of the noise. Probably just the wind, Jake said, waving off my concern with a chuckle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. As we pressed on, the whispers grew louder, weaving through the trees like a phantom, guiding us away from the path. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The air around us seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. Let's take a break, Tom suggested, breaking the tension. We gathered on a flat rock, sipping water and trying to catch our breath. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me, but the whispers persisted, echoing in the back of my mind. After a few minutes, we decided to continue our hike. But as we resumed our journey, I couldn't help but notice that the whispers seemed to shift direction, as if they were inviting us to stray from the trail. Should we explore a little off the path? Emma asked, her curiosity piqued. No, we should stick to the trail, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't want to get lost. But the whispers called to me, sweet and haunting, urging me to come closer. I glanced at my friends. They looked intrigued, glancing at each other as if debating what to do. Come on, it could be fun, Jake said, grinning. Just a quick look around. The sense of foreboding settled deeper in my gut, but the allure of the unknown was strong. I found myself torn between caution and the growing curiosity that came with the whispers. Okay, just for a few minutes, I relented, trying to mask my unease. We stepped off the trail, the whispers growing louder with each step we took. The trees closed in around us, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers, casting shadows that danced in the fading light. I felt a wave of apprehension wash over me, and I glanced back at the trail. It seemed to disappear into the shadows, leaving us vulnerable. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's just a little detour," Sarah said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. But as we ventured further into the trees, the whispers shifted into something else, an indistinct chant, rhythmic and unnerving. I couldn't make out the words, but they sent chills down my spine. "Let's go back," I urged, a sense of panic rising within me. "This doesn't feel right." But before I could turn around, the ground beneath us shifted slightly, and a low rumble echoed through the air. I looked at my friends, their expressions morphing from excitement to confusion. "What was that?" Tom asked, his voice edged with worry. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. We should really get back to the trail. But the whispers grew louder, drowning out our voices, wrapping around us like a thick fog. I felt a pull, a compulsion to move deeper into the woods, and for a moment, I hesitated, teetering on the edge of reason. "Guys, listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think we need to leave. This place isn't right." Just then, the chanting intensified, echoing in my mind like a mantra. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, darting between the trees, and I could feel an unseen presence watching us. Panic surged through me as the whispers transformed into a cacophony of voices, each one more urgent than the last. I grabbed Sarah's arm, and I could see the fear in her eyes mirrored in everyone else's. "We need to go, now!" I shouted, breaking free from the spell that had held me captive. We turned to flee back toward the trail, adrenaline fueling our speed, but the forest seemed to close in around us, branches grabbing our clothes, shadows dancing in the corners of our vision. The whispers turned into angry shouts, urging us to stay, to listen. My heart raced as we broke through the tree line, the path reappearing in front of us like a lifeline. "Run!" I yelled, the words tearing from my throat as we sprinted back onto the familiar trail. As we reached the path, the whispers faded into a distant echo, but I knew they would never truly leave us. As we burst back onto the main trail, the cacophony of whispers faded, but the tension in the air remained thick and suffocating. I could still feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us from the forest, lurking just beyond the safety of the trees. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked back at the shadows, half expecting something to emerge from the depths of the woods. "Did you hear that?" Jake gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Yes," I replied, still shaken. "We need to get back to the car. Now." We began to walk faster, our footsteps echoing against the gravel, but the unease lingered. The further we got from that cursed spot, the more my mind raced. Had we just encountered something supernatural? The whispers felt so real, yet part of me struggled to comprehend it. "What the hell was that?" Tom said, running a hand through his hair in disbelief. "I don't know," I admitted, shaking my head. But it felt alive, like it was trying to pull us in. As we continued down the trail, the atmosphere shifted. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows that danced around us. I glanced at my friends, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. I could see that they were all thinking the same thing. We had just strayed too far into something we didn't understand. "Let's stop for a moment," Sarah suggested, her voice shaky. "We need to regroup and catch our breath." We paused by a large rock outcropping, the view stretching out before us, a beautiful valley painted in hues of gold and orange. It was surreal, almost a cruel contrast to the dread we felt inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking nearby, hidden in the trees. "Maybe we should just forget about what happened," Emma said, attempting to sound brave. "It's probably just our imaginations. The mountains can play tricks on your mind." But I couldn't dismiss the reality of the whispers. They had felt too powerful, too insistent. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, we heard it again, a soft whispering, drifting through the trees. This time it was louder, clearer, wrapping around us like a cold embrace. "Please, no," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Not again." "Everyone, stay close," Mark ordered, his voice low. We huddled together, the sunlight fading quickly, replaced by shadows creeping closer and closer. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices beckoning us deeper into the woods. "Let's go back," I urged, glancing down the trail toward the parking lot. "We shouldn't be out here any longer." Just then, I noticed movement at the edge of the trees. A figure stepped forward, partially hidden in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" Mark called, his voice shaking. The figure lingered at the tree line, too far away to make out any features, but it felt ominous. "We should get out of here," I said, gripping Sarah's arm. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could sense the fear building among us. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, growing into a frantic plea that urged us to follow. "Come closer, come find us," they called, the voices merging into a single entity that sent chills down my spine. "No! We have to go now!" I shouted, panic rising. Mark nodded, and without another word, we turned and began to run. We raced down the trail, adrenaline surging through us as the forest closed in behind. The whispers transformed into angry shouts, demanding we return. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, shifting with every glance. We rounded a bend, the trail sloping downward. My breath came in ragged gasps as we pushed ourselves harder, desperate to escape whatever darkness had been awakened in those woods. The sun was setting, casting long shadows, and I could hear my friends panting behind me. As we reached a clearing, the panic surged within me, and I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but the whispers echoed in my mind, persistent and haunting. "What was that?" Emma gasped, trying to catch her breath. "I don't know," I admitted, fear twisting in my stomach. "But I think it wants us to come back." "Why would we do that?" Tom said, his eyes wide with fear. Just then, the ground beneath us trembled slightly, as if a low rumble was rolling through the earth. The air grew thick with tension, and I could feel the fear radiating off my friends. "Keep moving," I urged, turning to sprint down the remaining stretch of the trail. We pressed on, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness. As we reached the trailhead, the sight of our car brought a rush of relief. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the doors. "Get in! Get in!" I shouted, my voice desperate. We all piled into the car, slamming the doors shut behind us. I locked the doors, the sound of the locks clicking echoing through the silence. As I started the engine, I glanced back toward the woods, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees. But the forest stood still, quiet once more, as if nothing had happened. But I could still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, echoing in my mind. We had escaped, but the voice in the mountains would never truly leave us. As we sped away from the trailhead, the relief of leaving the shadows behind mingled with an unsettling sense of dread. The whispers faded into the background, but the memory of their haunting call lingered in my mind. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I drove, the headlights piercing through the encroaching darkness. Did that really just happen? Sarah asked, her voice quivering. I don't know, I replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. But I can't shake the feeling that we're not done with this. What do you mean? Jake asked, his brow furrowed. I mean, it felt like something was trying to lead us somewhere, to draw us in, I said, trying to put the pieces together in my mind. And the way that figure stood there, it was like it was waiting for us. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine. I could see the worry etched on my friends' faces, and I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Maybe we should tell someone, Tom suggested. The ranger station or the park authorities. They need to know what's going on out there. I think they just think we're crazy, Emma said, shaking her head. How can we explain the whispers and shadows? I knew she was right. How could we convey the overwhelming sense of fear, the pull of the unknown, the way the woods had seemed to come alive? As we drove along the winding road, the trees began to thin out, and the stars started to peek through the night sky. But just as I thought we were free, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease wash over me. Stop the car! I shouted suddenly, my heart racing. What? Why? Mark asked, looking startled. Just do it. I insisted, my voice urgent. I pulled over to the side of the road, my friends staring at me in confusion. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence enveloped us like a shroud. David, what's going on? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I just feel like something's wrong, I said, peering out into the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw movement in the trees, shadows flitting between the trunks. My heart began to race again, the anxiety clawing at my chest. Let's just go, Jake urged, glancing nervously toward the woods. But then I heard it again, the whispering, faint but unmistakable, weaving through the night air. It felt closer this time, as if the very woods were leaning in, trying to draw us back into their depths. Listen, I said, my voice trembling. The whispers grew louder, rising and falling like a chorus, urging us to follow. Come back, come find us, they sang, a haunting melody that pulled at my very soul. David, we can't stay here. Mark shouted, fear evident in his eyes. I nodded, fighting the urge to follow the sound. You're right. We need to go. But just as I turned to start the car, I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching us. My breath caught in my throat. It was the same figure we had seen earlier, standing still in the darkness, its features obscured. Doe! 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 I yelled, panic surging through me as I fumbled for the keys. The whispers turned into angry shouts, drying out my thoughts. Shadows swirled around us, and I felt the weight of something sinister pressing in. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I slammed the car into gear and sped down the road, the tires kicking up gravel as we raced away from the haunting whispers. As we drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure chasing after us, but there was nothing, just darkness behind us. What was that? Tom panted, still shaken. I don't know, but I think it wanted us to stay, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We drove in silence, the tension thick in the air. I could feel my friend's eyes on me, each of us lost in our own thoughts. What had we stumbled into? What were those whispers trying to tell us? When we finally reached the main road, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We had escaped the mountains, but I could still feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. As we drove further away, the whispers faded into the distance, but the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Do you think it will ever end? Sarah asked quietly, her voice trembling. I hope so, I replied, though I didn't believe it. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. And deep down, I knew that the voice in the mountains would haunt us long after we had left. Even now, as I write this, I can still hear those whispers echoing in my mind, and I wonder if they will ever truly let us go. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.